Hiya, folks. Today I was listening to a woman asking questions on a spiritual forum to do with a relationship with someone that she had been involved with, and it kind of sounded a little bit like there was some personality disorder conflict in the past in this relationship. Um, And the other day, I was talking to my psychologist about personality disorders with myself and adoptees, because once you get into that, you realize that we all have certain behaviors that could classify us, or tendencies that could classify us into a personality disorder sort of situation, depending on the severity and the problems that it may cause us in our life, which, I can relate with, since my relationships have caused me um, extreme distress, cost me jobs, relationships, etc., etc., etc. So, all that being said, I think what I've had to come to the realization um, about with adoptees is that it's another scenario whereas we are different. And due to the seeming lack of study of post-adoption and adult adoptees and their struggles, I am left to conclude that, although the DSM provides us with statistical behavioral analysis, um, that we don't necessarily fit under that category due to the nature of our original trauma that a lot of us suffered. So, um, I mean, that's very interesting to me as someone who's, taken it as a hobby to dig deep within myself and explore my feelings and explore the reality of the situation that I find myself in. So, I was just throwing that out there. I guess one big thing that I've encountered in my uh, life experience as an adoptee is the applying of that broken birth bond to another person. And that's a powerful thing. Um, it's taking um, that hole, that vacuum that we suffered when being removed from our mothers, and allows it to bond to another person as if they were essentially our mothers. And I'm still a little bit confused as to how that operates and works. But I can say that if that bond is reapplied to someone else and then is broken or betrayed or abandoned, the pain is unbelievable. The emotional pain that we re-suffer. Um, and I think that perhaps that might be um, a factor that just isn't really considered in the adoptees, because I don't think a regular person could be aware of what exactly that is. Even myself, um, you know, doing my own research on adoption and adoptees, um, used a lot of the like the Nancy Berrier work, Bert Bond work, to really try to understand and put things in perspective for myself. So that being said, I think, more study needs to be done there. And when I was talking to my psychologist about it, I asked her, because I can see very easily that the circumstances of the adoption have caused me to develop behaviors that would be classified as borderline personality disorder. Whereas they harm themselves physically, which I did when I was younger with cigarette burns and burning myself and things like that. Slowly but surely, I evolved into substance abuse to an extreme and crossing lines, whereas I was hurting myself in a different way. um, the the flip back and forth between idealization and um, you know um, turning that around into betrayal situations between people. When we decide to let people to trust people and then feel betrayed is another big one for us, which is hurtful. We're very forgiving, obviously. And I guess the biggest thing is I, as an adoptee, find myself overwhelmed with empathy, and you know, being in narcissist situations, that became a bit confusing. So certainly, I could see how trying to blend in, developed a bit of a persona that, in some ways could be considered a little bit narcissistic. Um, the underlying reasoning behind it wasn't there. I.e., I don't like to see people in pain. I don't like to control people. I don't like to hurt people. I like people to be with me because they want to be with me. Um, and if I get the impression that people don't want to be around me, well, certainly, it's hard not to be offended and feel hurt by that, and perhaps develop, well, I don't like you situation. But I think I'm a little bit beyond and a little bit more aware of that now to, you know, not worry too much about it. But, well, enough. But anyways, in talking to the psychologist, I said, well, what do you think? Do you think that the majority of adoptees are falling under this category, the ones that are suffering of the borderline personality disorder? And she said, well, I think more narcissist. Now, understandable, because we tend to be chameleons. But I guess that differs from a narcissist in that we're not trying to be chameleons to deceive anyone or to, you know, create false situations or think that our world is better or anything like that. I think our chameleon nature comes from the fact that I me anyways, there's no mesh between the adoptive family and myself. Um, Not even close. So that being said, where do I belong? And on top of that, growing up as a child and trying to figure out the world as it stands and seeing all sorts of different things, well, I mean, there's your hopes and fears out there as well that, um, but at the same token, subconsciously we don't know, because subconsciously we realize that we came from a bad situation and potentially bad people, um, or by societal standards anyways. um, so I guess the what I'm trying to say is that we have millions of adoptees. Well, if they're going to try to get help, who's going to help them? Because certainly the average person cannot really incorporate that key thing into their psyche and understand what it is to not have those God-given archetypes in our lives, whether for good or bad, um, and to own those, because we're given paper versions, straw man versions of our mother and father. They're only mother and father by paper and by whatever particular political agenda they were trying to fit through their statistical placements of these adopted children. So, I mean, personally, I'd like to have full access to the social engineering that goes on here at the highest levels. I think that would be absolutely mind blowing. Um, but I also wanted to add in today some positives about the adoption. Um, it's if you walked up to some people at a lake and they threw their baby into that lake, well, given current scenarios, you would think, what horrible people. And yet, if we study history a little bit, we can go back to times and cultures whereas this was a rite of passage that you sank or swim. And I think that's probably where the old saying comes from, sink or swim. But I don't know for sure. But at the same token, those kids coming back and swimming into shore or being able to swim that lived must have been much stronger. Well, what is the evolution of that ideology of testing your um, your offspring? Well, I mean adoption. You're metaphorically throwing your child out into the world completely unaware, besides some social worker saying, "Oh, it'll be a better life." Well, you're trusting your government, so I mean, obviously you haven't become enlightened and aware enough to realize that that may not coincide with your best interest for your child. Um, so, anyways, the point being is that it's a struggle. It is an absolute struggle, and you may for the average normie out there, you may think adoptees, but I do run into this because I am a bit of an advocate and I am a little bit vocal about adoption and the wrongs that are involved. And I can tell you that most people who have adopted friends, and most do because it's such a common practice, seem to think that their adopted friends are well adjusted and are happy with that situation. And yet, some of those people that I've talked to will come back to me and say, you know what, I was wrong. That I talked to my friend who's adopted and mentioned how you felt about it, and they agreed that it hasn't been easy and there has been a lot of pain. And you know, I don't think that public knowledge can hurt our situation, but again, it's going to hurt the adoption industry, and it's a business. It's a business, and it's a successful way to control people. So, I mean, they don't want our stories told. But all those things being said, being left to your own devices as a baby and being raised somewhere that you don't belong, all those things I believe create some hyper defenses, possibly some hyper tools to help us negotiate the world and move along. And again, that sort of ability to blend in. It can be considered a supernatural sort of ability because I don't think most people are born with that. They adjust to their one setting and away they go. But for ourselves, we need to blend in because chances are we're not going to fit in the box that we're put, and we'll be moving around and looking for those boxes. And I think that we all get sort of an even playing field, um, for I don't really know how to put that, but anyways, there is positives for sure, and we as adoptees, and every adoptee I know is a magnanimous, interesting individual, and to be a trusted friend to an adoptee. I don't think there's any more loyal sort of individual you could ever have, but try to remember that when you're reading them, and if you're trying to psychoanalyze them, that they have different qualities that may be construed as red flags uh, in a normal person that don't necessarily apply in the adoptee. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Those of you who maybe have done your own psychoanalysis or been in psychology. But I would highly recommend for those of you who are in counseling or in therapy to go ahead and do your own research as well, and then think about what I've said, because if someone can't understand you, then how can they help you? Fair enough?